Okay, it is time to get started. Welcome to Ohio End of Life Options Town Hall meeting. We are so grateful that you're here to join us, and we're so thankful to have Valerie Lovelace of Maine Death with Dignity, and most recently, Death with Dignity National Center joining us. Valerie was instrumental in getting Maine's Death with Dignity Act passed last year, and so we're thrilled that she's joining us. She is the founder and executive director of that 501c3 Maine Death with Dignity. And in joining Death with Dignity National Center, she helps their Dignity 50 state legislative incubator groups. So she has done this from top to bottom. We're so thankful for her. She's also a retired Navy veteran. So we thank her for her service in so many ways.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you for inviting me. It's really an honor to be here today and to talk about our Maine experience. My apologies for not having video availability. As Lisa mentioned, we had a pretty big storm last night. Where I live in Maine, if anybody sneezes too loud, we lose internet. So I actually have my phone hooked up to my computer to be able to get wireless access and share my slides with you. The first thing I would like to say, I really want to offer a little bit of a disclaimer because oftentimes people will ask, you know, what's the roadmap? How did you do it? Just tell us how you did it in Maine. We'll follow those steps and we'll do it in our state. And it really doesn't work that way, I'm sad to say. If there were a formula, believe me, I would have used it 5 years ago here, and I would have shared it to the other 40-some states that are waiting to pass their legislation. So I'd like to give you just a little bit of an overview of how I ended up in the movement. Then I'll talk a little bit, very briefly, about what Maine looks like demographically. And then I'll go more into the things we did here and what we went through here in Maine to get our law passed eventually. So as Lisa mentioned, I founded a nonprofit organization in early 2014. It was originally called It's My Death. We are still registered that way. I have a doing business as agreement with the state of Maine for using the name Maine Death with Dignity. I actually founded this organization in memory of my sister who died at the age of 49 in 2009 to help break down taboos around talking about death. That was really my original intention, was here in the state of Maine to help people overcome death phobia in a way that made it possible for them to talk with family and friends and things like that. In the process of doing that, I established really long-term working relationships with other, what I call death positive or mortality friendly people in groups. Including Death Cafe. We had an organization here called Changing the Face of Dying, the Funeral Consumers Alliance of Maine, and a local organization called Last Things, whose focus is after death care in terms of, you know, how do you deal with paperwork and, you know, how do you transport a body in the state of Maine if you want to do that, and that sort of thing. So I began to develop those relationships and to grow my mailing list. And I started teaching around the state of Maine on the history of the Death with Dignity movement. And I'll get a little bit more into how that happened. Once we were actually campaigning as a grassroots organization, I felt it was really important to develop connections with other groups whose opposition was similar to our own. So here in Maine, primary opposition, organized opposition, came mostly from religious and evangelical groups. And there were other groups in the state who experienced the same thing. And so I started just bridging connections with those folks. Groups like our Healthcare for All movement, any kind of political resist or indivisible group. There's an organization here called the Maine People's Alliance. They were at the time working on a citizens initiative for increasing minimum wage. Maine Equity Alliance is a focus on LGBTQ communities and access to healthcare, and of course, Planned Parenthood. I didn't necessarily, we didn't form coalitions, formal coalitions with these groups, but we all stayed connected because we had similar values and similar beliefs when it came to end-of-life care. I also felt it was really necessary, if we were going to move legislation as a grassroots organization, to maintain and develop good relationships with members of the legislature that we knew were supportive. I found out who those guys were by just doing some research on past bills, and starting to reach out to them to see where they stood on it. The things that I learned during the campaign that I feel really is essential for any state trying to pass legislation is, first of all, that education is essential. And that's not just for, for folks who either want to promote a bill or actually want to oppose a bill, but for lawmakers, healthcare providers. I felt it was really important to educate from a position of neutrality. I coined that fact-based education, just talking about what the laws do and what they don't, because I felt it was really necessary that people should understand and be fully informed about what they want to support or oppose. I think listening is fundamental in these conversations because there are so many, such a wide variety of viewpoints. And I just want to recommend the book, The Zen of Listening. It's when I went back to school for my master's degree, it's one of the books that I read, and it really, really helped me recognize how to prepare myself to listen openly to people. As most of you are aware, you will encounter all kinds of amazing stories that people want to share with you about their personal lives, their loved ones. And I think it's really important to be in a place where you can be wholly receptive to that and to hold space for those storytellers in a really good way. I think it's incredibly important to maintain respect and decorum when you're speaking with individuals who disagree. And sometimes that can be challenging. I had to learn where my buttons are and what it felt like when they were getting pushed, so that I could have ways to extricate myself from those conversations before they escalated. I had an experience after a hearing where an individual was actually yelling at me across the State House, up these marble stairs into the rotunda, and it was echoing everywhere through the State House. And I just chose to ignore it because I felt like he was doing enough damage to his own integrity by doing something like that. And it's really important, that when you're in a grassroots movement, you are representing so many different people whose opinions and values are aligned with the work that you're doing, that you want to maintain your professionalism. And then I feel like no matter what state you live in, it is necessary really to understand three aspects of advocacy work or campaigning work that I think are essential to this movement. And the first is, why does Oregon's law really work? And why does opposition hate that so much? And in fact, what opposition tends to do to try to undermine the fact that the law actually works exactly as intended and exactly for whom intended, and has stood up to medical and legal scrutiny for 25 years. I think it's important to understand opposition messaging and the themes that they use for that, because it can take many different forms. So it might take the form of, a physician shouldn't participate in this because they have a duty to do no harm. It might take the form of, that it's not up to we mortals to interfere in the natural process of our living and dying. It could take a religious overtone. So I think it's really important to understand how that organized messaging gets delivered and how persuasive it can be for people who are on the fence if they don't have the facts, which is another reason I think it's so important really to focus on fact-based education. And then of course, third is to understand the legislative process in your state. And here I have to cheerfully plead guilty. When I got involved in this, I didn't even know who my representatives were. I had never been to the State House. I had no clue how a bill became a law. So I was really very naive about the process. And that may have helped me in some ways because I had no preconceived ideas. I actually had to go learn and experience what it was like in order to effectively engage with that process. Just a little bit about Maine. We are about 1.3 million in population. We have a square mileage area of roughly around 65,000 or 6,500 square miles. So we're, I think, like the 34th smallest state in the union. We're fairly balanced between male and female populations, whether we're looking at the demographic of voting age and overall population. We're pretty close to 50-50. We are a predominantly white state with slightly over 96% declaring themselves Caucasian. And then we have very small populations of Black, Native American, Asian, and Hispanic people in our state. Maine, even though its political history tends to be a bit more blue than a red state, we also have a deep history of racial disparity. We have a history of the KKK here and hate crimes, even recently with swastikas appearing on synagogues and things like that. So we struggle with our identity sometimes here in the state. Having said that, we also have a rather progressive population of people in our state too that really work very hard to advocate for social issues and work towards resolution and even reconciliation with some of Maine's more difficult history. So I do think it's really important to know your state and to dig into the details of your state. For our active voter registration, I think we have about just slightly over 1 million active registered voters. We're pretty well split between Republican, Democrat, and unenrolled, which is essentially undeclared party. So these that 32% yellow slice there are people who only vote in the general elections. They don't get to vote in primaries. And then we have a very small number of folks who declare themselves in the Green Party. What I think is essential to keep in mind about your political makeup is there's no real guarantee that a Republican is against this issue or that a Democrat is for this issue. So I think it's really important, even though you want to know about your makeup in terms of party registration doesn't necessarily indicate how a person will be supportive of this issue, including your lawmakers. The challenge, I think, with lawmakers is, at least what we experienced here in Maine, our Republican lawmakers, whether they supported the bill or not, did not come out publicly to say so. We had exactly 2 Republicans of our entire legislature who voted to pass the law this last time. One of them was a bill sponsor, and she was an amazing advocate, and she took a lot of heat as a Republican senator for sponsoring this bill. We found that out after the fact. Once the bill got to the governor's desk, a number of the Republicans who voted against it actually went to speak with her to ask her to sign the bill. But that's something we never got to know because they were not in a position, they felt, to be public about their support of it, whether it's because they had a conservative constituency or whether they were, pressured by their caucus. I don't really know the answers to that. But so I just want to emphasize, don't assume based on political party that you either have support or opposition. Religiously, we're kind of a little bit all over the map. About 30% of us don't declare an affiliation with a particular organized religion. We're about 60% Protestant Catholic, and then there's a lot of other faiths. We tend, when I took a look, I assessed our legislature, we tend to be about 30% in our legislature incredibly conservatively religious. I was actually kind of blown away to discover that, given that a veto override takes 65% of your legislature. If you've got almost 30% voting with the religious right, you're starting to run a risk of not being able to have a veto override vote in your legislature with that kind of influence. I actually found that out by following a very conservative Christian group here in Maine and their mailing list and their website, because just before elections, they would post the candidates they were endorsing, and then they would take it down quickly. But I was able to get that kind of intel by signing on to their mailing list. So I sort of recommend that as a incognito way to gather information about your candidates if you need that. For the 2016 presidential election, we actually, by popular vote, voted Hillary Clinton. But if you look at our map, you see this vast expanse of red in our state. The entire top, I would say top half to the western part of Maine is actually so not populated by human beings. There's approximately one person every square mile up in our northern region of Maine. So we tend to be extremely rural, except along the coast. So this map, even though it shows our political tendencies during the 2016 election, is a direct mirror of our population concentration as well. We're very populated along the coast and slightly up towards the center of the state where our capital is. And then for the rest of the state, we're incredibly rural. I think that any conversation around aid and dying laws needs to be in context. And so I always like to show this slide. Obviously, Oregon started in 1994. They actually passed the referendum in 94. It immediately went into a legal battle. When the state won its argument, the legislature put it up for citizens' vote again, and it passed in 1997.
Going on, and I was just going to say that as more states are passing it in a shorter time period, 1 in 5 Americans has this option, and so many people are aware of it now. So Val, I'll let you jump right back in.
So as I was saying, the 1999 conviction of Dr. Kevorkian I think really set off a different kind of public conversation around the ways we die. And even though, my personal feeling is that he crossed some ethical boundaries that he should not have when he actively participated in the death of his patient, in the context of our times, I really do have to credit him back in those days with making this a public conversation, that people were dying in ways that were not easy, and that people needed to be aware of that. So it wasn't until 2008 that Washington actually passed their law by referendum. That was followed by a court case in 2009 in Montana. Montana still to this day does not have a statute, although they do allow medical aid in dying. From what I have heard, it's really an obscure option in Montana because there is no visibility to it. That was followed by Vermont, and they actually made history being the first state to pass a law by legislation in 2013. And that's about the time I got involved. We had a bill before the Maine legislature at the same time, and the Maine bill failed miserably, and Vermont passed theirs. And I was beside myself. I couldn't figure out how 2 states away, they totally got it. And here in Maine, we couldn't seem to figure it out. Of course, I hadn't read the bill in Maine, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. And then along in the fall of 2014, another major event occurred. I'm sure you guys are all aware of it, is the death of Brittany Menard and the publishing of her story. That her video on YouTube now has over 12 million hits on it. It has been viewed worldwide. And that was like really the second catalyst in this conversation around aid and dying. Is here was this vibrant 29-year-old young woman whose life was coming to an end because of a glioblastoma brain tumor, and she was willing to share that story, she and her family. And so I really consider that a catalyst in the movement. If you look at the distance between Oregon's first passage and Vermont's, and then you look from the death of Brittany Menard, we've passed 7 laws in a really short period of time, 7 laws in 7 years. That's kind of amazing given the slower pace prior to Brittany's death. And of course, now, we have this other unknown thing called COVID-19 that I think will definitely be an influence in end-of-life conversations and legislation, and, whether when you're dying of an infectious disease, can your loved one sit with you at the hospital, and what that's going to look like, and how will it alter advance directives. So, of course, right now, we don't know the outcome of it. We don't know the outcome of COVID-19 yet due to COVID. The Massachusetts bill is the only one still active. It, along with all other legislation in Massachusetts, was delayed rather than shut down. And so we're still waiting to hear how that's going to go in Massachusetts. For Maine's history, we have a very checkered past on this issue. Our first attempt was in 1994 alongside Oregon. You'll see I have some of these bills highlighted in red, and that is because these were full-blown euthanasia bills. These did not model Oregon's law, and I really feel that these attempts made it far more difficult for Maine to get passage, because frankly, I think even today our society is not yet ready to be talking about euthanasia or hastening death if you have dementia and other things. Anyway, so Maine had an on-again, off-again attempts at passing the law. 1995 was an Oregon modeled law, almost verbatim on Oregon's law. We had a ballot initiative in the year 2000. I remember voting for that. It failed by a really small margin, about 6,000 votes. So it took us another 20 years. And it sort of lay dormant for 13 years. Nothing happened via the legislature. And then in 2013, at the same time that Vermont was going through Act 39, we had LD 1065, which was actually sponsored by the same guy that sponsored the bill in 1998. And it also was a full-blown euthanasia bill. So once I read that, I thought, well, this bill actually should have failed. It was not well written. It did not have safeguards in it. And the legislature was just not prepared to cope with it. At the time, I was back in school for my master's degree, and I was looking for a capstone course, and I was sort of beside myself over the Vermont passage and Maine's yet again another failure. And our capstone course was to research a topic of interest and develop a course of instruction in order to teach it. And so my professor challenged me and said, I think you might have found your capstone. Why don't you go investigate for it? So that's what I did. So I still credit her for launching me into this, this direction. To the point where I started in the fall of 2013, actually teaching adult education classes in Maine on medical aid in dying and the history of it and what it was and what it wasn't, in the context of the laws here in the United States. In 2015, we had a Republican senator sponsor a bill, LD 1270, that was modeled on Vermont's law. And I actually have a lot of respect for this senator, Senator Roger Cates. He is a moderate Republican. He was actually on a plane ride to the Orient and was sitting next to the bill sponsor from Vermont. I don't know what they were going to the Orient for, but so they talked all the way across the ocean about the Vermont law and all the way back, and he decided to introduce his legislation. The three bills that are in green, they're in green for a couple of reasons. The first is that they made history. Each bill made history. Senator Cates's first attempt, LD 1270, actually passed the House. It's the first ever that an aid and dying bill had passed our House. It passed by 76 to 70, and it failed by a single vote in our Senate, which was pretty heartbreaking. He came back in 2017 with LD 347, changed the title of it, added a couple of extra safeguards from another lawmaker, and that bill passed the Senate but failed the House. In retrospect, when I consider what had happened, we had a governor at the time who was vehemently opposed to this issue, and in 2017 publicly announced to the media he would veto it if it came to his desk. So I really feel, had we had a governor that was more receptive, these bills would have made it to the governor's desk, but the legislature was unwilling to give him the power and the privilege of vetoing the bill, knowing that they couldn't bring it back during his administration if he vetoed it. So they yanked it. Fast forward then to 2018. Well, actually in 2017, when LD 347 failed, it literally took all the air out of my balloons. I cannot tell you how hard it was to walk out of that state house knowing that we lost it by a vote. And and I thought, you know what, we really aren't going to get this passed without a citizens initiative, which was something my senator had said to me back in 2013. So I thought, that's it, we're going to do a citizens initiative. And we set about doing that. We began to gather signatures. And fortunately, one of the co-sponsors of the Senator Cates's bills was a retired physician lawmaker by the name of Patty Hymanson. She's a Democrat from York, which is a southern county. She was a neurologist for 30 years. She had 11 years medical ethics background. She was wholeheartedly behind the two previous attempts. And after she was reelected, she contacted me and she said, what do you think about this? Why don't you guys continue your citizens initiative effort? And I'll run this one more time through the legislature to see what we can do. Of course, the big difference at that time was we had elected a new governor, Governor Janet Mills, who did not have the same values and aspirations as our previous governor. And so it really felt like an opportune time to see if the legislature could pull it off. And we felt like we had a fallback position. If they failed to get it through one more time, we could go to ballot with it. And so I think we were really, it was like a perfect storm. We were positioned in just the right way, with the right administration, the right makeup in our legislature, which, you know, they had won back a majority in the Senate. And we had a citizens go to ballot and pass. And we managed to get the law passed here. So it was signed in June of last year, into effect September 19th. There was a challenge against it. An opposition group tried to put together an initiative to go to ballot with a repeal effort. They didn't get the signature they needed. Our law went into effect on September 19th. The amazing thing about this, I think, in looking at the national landscape of states that have passed laws, is I think Maine was the first state where a major healthcare network came forward on the day the law went into effect and said, we're going to support patient decisions. And that was the Maine Health Network in Mid-Coast Parkview. They had to take a little bit of time to get their policies together, how they were going to manage that internally. And their efforts, I think, really, along with the Maine Medical Association moving to a position of neutrality, and the Maine Hospital Association sort of being involved in some of the internal policy work, our two other major healthcare providers, Northern Light Health in Northern Maine and Maine General in Central Maine, who now also have supportive policies. We still do have independent providers and independent networks.
Well, we've lost Valerie again. Section, and I'm going to quickly introduce Muffy Caseberg, who will a little bit about our efforts here in Ohio and what we've done and what we're hoping to accomplish. So Muffy, I guess if you want to jump in, we'll get going.
Great, thank you. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. This was really a great talk from Val. So I am the current chair of the board of Ohio End of Life Options, and so I just wanted to welcome everyone to our slideshow here, which is representative of our first ever annual report of our organization. So we're not going to do every slide, but we are going to go through some of them. So this slide really tells you everything you need to know about our organization. It's the reason that we exist, and that's to advocate for passing a medical aid in dying law in Ohio for the terminally ill. And we're working every day for Ohioans to gain the knowledge and power about how to direct their own end-of-life care. And we want everyone to know that we recognize each person's goals and perspectives will be different, but we believe that the laws and access to them should be equitable for all. So this slide shows us the path to achieving our mission. The big things that we're trying to do throughout Ohio are build awareness, provide education, and inspire advocacy. And Val really pushed on the fact that education and people understanding what the law really represents and what it's supposed to be is pretty key to getting buy-in from people. So that's our goal and mission as we go forward. So this is a slide that just shows you who our team is, and thank you to our wonderful team of Sarah Hum, Molly Graziano, and Lisa Schattinger, who really run the day-to-day activities of our organization and actually get things done. And then we have the board of directors on the right. And thank you to everyone who has been working with us throughout the last few years as we've tried to build our organization. And our newest member is Vicki Miller, who joined us after her mother passed away and wished she had been able to take advantage of a medical aid in dying law herself. So Vicki has joined our board and will be representing us in building coalition and providing education in the Cincinnati area. So welcome, Vicki.
Hello again. So when I started this, I started it because I'm from Oregon. My stepfather used the law. I was with him when he did, and his peaceful death that was exactly according to his wishes was just so profound to me. And when I came back to Ohio to research how to get, if anybody was already working on this, I found that there was no current group working toward this in Ohio at all. But I found one quote from, not even a quote actually, just a little blurb in a newspaper article saying that Senator Tavares would consider this type of legislation in the next General Assembly session. And that was, gosh, in 2014-15, I started looking at that. So I got a hold of her, and thankfully she was amazing to work with, and we provided her with as much information with a draft bill, and she did finally introduce legislation in January of 2018. And she knew that that kind of put us at that starting place where Val's timeline was, this takes a while. And so this kind of started our clock. She first got it out there so we could start having this conversation for real throughout Ohio, and just, talk about it. It also gave us the opportunity to see what Ohioans thought about it, because nationally, polling shows that overwhelmingly the population supports this, but we didn't know specifically what Ohioans thought. And so this poll in May of 2018 found that overwhelmingly the voters surveys support this issue, and that is across political affiliation, religious affiliation, everyone. So it really helps give us some talking points that in fact people do support this. Then we set about putting together our organization and working on our strategic plan. And as Val said, coming together with other groups that support this as an issue is just so phenomenally important. And whether they publicly take a stance in support, which of course we want, is great, but if they don't do that, then we also just need to be in touch with them so that members who are supportive can be in touch and support each other throughout these different types of organizations. So we've got these wonderful advisory committees now. One is headed by Dr. Mary Jo Prince Paul, who is a remarkable nurse scientist with over 30 years of experience in oncology, palliative, and hospice care. And she just has this tremendous perspective about the importance of medical aid in dying as an option for end-of-life care. And so she'll be really heading this group so that we can gather people in these health care communities to provide education and build communities of support. One of the ways we've done that is to be able to get to conferences. And we go there and we put up a table and we give out information and have lots of conversations and get people interested to sign up in our newsletter. And we we're very aware of current events. So like we knew that the American Academy of Family Practice Physicians had taken a stance of studied neutrality. And so that was important because then we can go to the Ohio group and say, just so you know, your national group has this position. We'd like you to be thinking about this as an issue. We also work hard to get to different colleges and universities throughout the state. And so we welcome the opportunity to get to that. The students always just have phenomenal questions and observations. So that's a wonderful way to get out there. Now I'll be turning it over to Ann Rowland.
Thank you, Lisa. Good afternoon, everyone. I have the honor of serving as the chair of the Law and Policy Committee. And that committee has been charged with the responsibility of raising awareness, educating, and advocating in the legislature and in the legal community. And as I'm sure you're all aware, Ohio is a big challenge in the legislature in that the Republicans hold the supermajority in the House and in the Senate, and they hold the governor's position as well. So our goal in this legislature as presently constituted is to make our legislators aware of our existence and to educate them about the law, and hopefully to find somebody to sponsor the bill again, since Senator Tavares is no longer in office. She was term limited. In furtherance of this effort, our committee, which is composed of two very experienced healthcare lawyers who've been involved in healthcare legislation throughout their careers. That's Ruth Anna Carlson and Linda Middleman. David Goodman, who is a lawyer and has been very active in running two different nonprofits. And through his work as a lawyer has had a lot of involvement with public entities. And Mia Garsha, who is our newest member, a young estate planning lawyer who has experience in hospice. So we have a lot of expertise on this committee. In January, we continued our legislative efforts and did a day of lobbying down in Columbus, which went very well with the Democrats, not so well with Republicans, but we did want to meet with Republicans to make sure that they understand exactly what the bill is and what the safeguards are. We were advised that this strategy of meeting quietly with individual legislatures is the best way in a state like Ohio to start making our message heard. And we were getting ready to continue that strategy with a second day of lobbying in March when everything shut down for COVID-19. We had one post-COVID meeting with the legislator, and just not quite the same as sitting in an office face-to-face to explain our own experiences, our own stories, and educate them on what this bill has to offer Ohioans, and the fact that all Ohioans, majority of Ohioans, regardless of their religion, political affiliation, or ethnicity, support a bill like this. So given the realities of the legislative calendar and COVID-19, and a third factor that's a big one, is the election in November, we have decided that we will lie low until after the election and then renew our efforts to find a sponsor to introduce this bill. And you might wonder, why do we want to introduce a bill in this legislative climate, assuming it stays the same or similar after the election? And that is because, as Val pointed out, this is a marathon, not a sprint. It was a 25-year effort in Maine, and I'm hoping it won't be that long in Ohio, of course, but we have to get the ball rolling, and it will take a lot of effort over a lot of years to achieve our goal. That said, the introduction of the legislation in and of itself, I consider to be a substantial step, because it really will enhance our efforts to elevate the profile of this organization and the benefits of this legislation. So we are going to work very hard after the election to start finding a sponsor to reintroduce this bill. So that is what we have been up to, and we will keep you posted on our efforts.
Thanks, Anne. I want to take just a second and point out that this annual report is meant to be very interactive. You will all get a link to it. It's on our website now in the About section, but you'll all get a link to it later so that if you want to find out more information, delve into some of these links, anytime you see these teal links, that's something to click on if you want to get involved. Now we're going to move on to Molly McMahon-Graziano, our Chair of Education and Outreach.
Hi, everybody. So what I'm going to talk to you about is kind of my little corner of the world, and that's basically the entire state of Ohio. So my goal is to increase, maintain, fine-tune our messaging, and as we move across the state, try to get people more engaged. We find that once we get people involved, or we talked about the issue and we get that awareness out there, there are so many people that are interested in it, they just hadn't had it on their radar at the time. So we've had an incredibly positive response from the public and even healthcare folks across the state of Ohio. So that's really, really encouraging. We pretty much will go anywhere and talk to anybody, and we've been so fortunate because so many of our supporters have been gracious enough to invite us to different events across the country. So we've been very fortunate there, and we do have a speakers bureau. So please, you know, if you have anything that you're interested in, we can help you out with that. You'll see at the bottom corner, oh, never mind, that's right, real quick, at the bottom, at the Gavelli Center in Youngstown, we actually tested doing a health fair, a community health fair, and that was really successful. We were able to get our information out to about 1,000 people that day, and that was really impactful. Again, not that it was going to change anything, but we're finding that it's all about a layering process. You've kind of heard, since everyone has started talking about how all of this is very interconnected, and one of the things that I want to do is to be able to get our policy committee and our lobbying teams that backing, that strong public constituency, because at the end of the day, that is what's going to change the face of things in Ohio. It's going to be driven by the people, and it's going to have to be driven by a lot of people. We're a state of 11 million people. We don't need all 11 million, although it would be nice, but we definitely need to have a strong showing in order for us to go down to Columbus and really clearly say, listen, this is what people in Ohio want. So basically it's myself and Lisa, and we have some wonderful volunteers, and you've met some of them here today, but we were able last year to connect with over 2,000 people. Now, most of those were public outreach, which was fantastic. Again, I've said our supporters are fabulous about inviting us to different events. And then we did the healthcare. Most of the healthcare pieces were focused on us doing exhibitor and speaking engagements at various healthcare conferences. And we have found that to be a really, really incredible way for us to reach out to healthcare professionals from all across the state. The Ohio Nurses Association, National Association of Social Workers, Ohio Academy of Family Practice Physicians. Those events that are held in Columbus bring people from all over. So it's really a nice way for us to reach a lot of people from across the state in one location. And our policy team, Ann talked about that, just that obviously that's a more narrow focus. So that's why that number doesn't look large, but trust me, it is impactful. So one of the things that comes from all of this outreach that we're doing and the awareness that we're doing is giving people the opportunity to follow us, to sign up for our email updates, and then hopefully learn more about us, more about the issue, what's happening across the country. One of the things that I work on is social media, but we'll talk about that in a second. But we looked at the entire state. We have 88 counties in Ohio. It's a fairly big state. So what we really decided to do was we actually needed to section it off so that we could pinpoint and get better with tracking, get better with pinpointing our message, hopefully help to grow our volunteer base. So we focused initially on Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati and Dayton. And those numbers have kind of borne out in the numbers on the left-hand side. And it's been wonderful. We've gotten Vicki now from the Cincinnati area. We've got Susan Moosey from the Columbus area, Kristen Lally. We've got just a wonderful, wonderful group of folks. I know I'm going to forget folks. So that's been big because we thought we needed to go to the big areas and then be able to work our way out to the other smaller areas or get a good group in those large cities that would then be able to assist us in developing chapters there, which we do have. to help us then spread the message across the rest of Ohio. This, I have to say, is just, it's just gold in terms of awareness. It's gold in terms of education, because most of us have come to this issue because we have some kind of personal story, something, we know someone who's had either a good death, a bad death. We were the caregiver for that person. And personal stories, like anything, help us all to connect to what's really going on, because sometimes when you're in the middle of being a caregiver for somebody who's terminally ill, it can be lonely and you think, am I the only one going through this? But kind of seeing some of these personal stories across the state have really helped people in those areas relate. And we find that they're really drawn to them and they want to learn more about the issue, because Lisa and I, when we talk to people, well, what do you do? This is what I do. And then people are like, let me tell you a story about, because it's really not something you're generally talking about a lot to family and friends about, either, you know, if somebody that you loved didn't have the death that they wanted. Most people aren't talking about it. So it's wonderful that they get the opportunity to share their story, to meet other like-minded people, and to say, my loved one didn't get the ending that they wanted. I don't want that to happen for anybody else. I know I personally wake up every day with the understanding that somebody who's terminally ill today wants access to a medical aid in dying law in Ohio and doesn't have it. That's what drives me and what drives us to make sure that this happens, because it's another pathway for end of life, and we think everyone should have all the options in Ohio, not just some of them. Here we are in the radio. Lisa and I love to talk, so that's not a problem. It's great when we get the opportunity to go on the radio, and, you know, obviously any kind of outreach is wonderful, because, you know, Mansfield Fraser is very funny. He made it very easy for us to have a conversation, and it's just another avenue that ties in with everything else that we're doing to help get information out, but also to also destigmatize end-of-life conversations, which is so important, and it goes hand in hand with kind of what the work that we're doing. So social media is growing slowly but steadily. When we first started Facebook, probably a few years ago, Lisa, we had maybe like 100, but I will tell you, a lot of those likes and everything come from the personal stories that are out there, people sharing our information, one of their friends sees it. Some of you are probably too young, maybe some of you aren't. The old commercial where you tell two friends, the hair shampoo commercial, and I'll tell two friends, and so on and so on and so on. And that's really what it's about. So if you do follow us on social media, and please do, please share, like, comment, because the more that you engage on social media with us, the more exposure we're going to get on social media. And that's really a cost-effective way for us to be good stewards of funds and to be able to spread the message in a really, really effective way. So we're always looking to fine-tune those messages. And on Facebook, I don't just share things about medical aid and dying. I share, of course, all the updates that come out, and we're following Massachusetts right now very closely. But I think it's important to look at all the issues that surround that as well. So we'll cover issues. I'll share things related to grief if I think it's gonna, if it's gonna be helpful. We'll share things related to advanced directives, because we know how important that is. Anything that's kind of an ancillary that attaches to what we're doing, because we think, as Val mentioned in her piece, that death positive focus of making sure that people are talking about that broad issue and having a philosophy of what their end of life wants to look like. The thing I'd also want to point out at the bottom is our hashtag. So that is our hashtag for everything. So if you are sharing something, please make sure that you hashtag us, because that helps us to find other content and good things to share when you guys are sharing stuff. So this is a wonderful project. It had an interesting kind of convergence of events. We had, when New Jersey passed their medical aid and dying law, the Cleveland Plain Dealer and Fox 8, I think it was, they had, or Cleveland.com, they shared articles and were asking people in Ohio, should Ohio consider a similar proposal? We were thrilled that they were sharing this information on their Facebook page, because that's really great information for us to be able to gather. Of course, it was a lot. I mean, and I kept watching the numbers going, and Lisa and I were on there every day, communicating with people on the posts. So what was best was I was talking with Dr. Mary Jo, Prince Paul, who you met earlier. And I said, it would really be neat if we could, find out how this all works. And Mary Jo goes, we can do that, because Mary Jo is a research expert on top of everything else that she does. And she has a fantastic student, one of her students that she was working with. And they decided that they would turn this into a research project for one of the nursing students at Case Western Reserve, Megan. I don't know if she's on here today, but thank you. And Megan did such a magnificent job of putting together a research project that allowed us to analyze what was really happening with these comments. There's kind of something in social media that, like, I can like or love something, but once I'm willing to make a comment, that means I'm a little bit more passionate about it, whether it's in support or in opposition. What we found from this in general was that it really confirmed everything that we found in the 2018 survey. People want the option. People at a minimum, even if they're not going to use the option, think people should have the availability of it, and that the opposition was not really coming out and speaking too much. And it also allowed us to look at certain messaging words so that we can more effectively communicate with people in Ohio. You heard Val talking about the folks in Maine. Well, how we're going to communicate with the folks in Maine, the themes are the same, but those messages might be a little bit different. So this research project with Megan and Dr. Prince Paul and Case was just a wonderful opportunity for us to really confirm what came out of the 2018 survey.
Thank you, Molly. I just want to give you a couple of ideas of some of the things. Again, we take every opportunity we can to head to the State House and talk to people. And we hope to be getting more people trained over time so that when we go, we'll have more people able to join us and have those great kind of intimate conversations with some of these legislators. This was one of the tools that we were able to start this last year. I'm so thankful to Jim O'Neill, whose wife Addie died late last year. And he immediately reached out and said, we need to make progress in Ohio. And he had already written a letter to the editor in a local paper. And so he was all on board for us to use this, her story, as a way to reach out to people and get them to communicate with their legislators. And so if you go to this, you'll see at the bottom, write to your legislators now. Right now, you could click on that and it would generate an email that you could send to your legislators and read more about her story. And we had hoped to have a schedule of doing that with different stories throughout the year when things kind of stopped again. But we have this in our tool belt now. It's such an effective way to talk to your legislators, and because it's a real story. It's a real Ohioan who went through this and who wants change. And the other thing I would say is if you do that, write the letter, follow up with an email and say, hey, did you see my email? I'd love to talk to you about it. And then schedule a meeting with your legislator and invite one of us to join you, because they want, they want to hear from their constituents. And that's just a really effective way to get in and start having these conversations. And we never forget, as Molly said, that there's Ohioans who want this. Pamela is in the Columbus area. She is just fabulous. She is so full of life and living as well as she can with challenging times. Bob Gelatley was just wonderful to talk to. He died in January of 28, which is actually the same month that Senator Tavares introduced legislation for this first time. But he knew that there was a good chance that he would die without having this right, but he wanted to use his voice anyway. So moving forward, figured out that we really had to broaden our topics, our areas that we were talking about. And so we're so thankful to Mary Jo Prince Paul for having this discussion about advanced care planning, and Sarah Peck for securing your legacy. And that kind of led us down to this path of, okay, what else can we be doing online? And we'll be doing more of these over time. I want to point out that we do have a LinkedIn, or excuse me, a YouTube channel, so you can go there, but these are also links if you wanted to go to these and watch them. Through Death with Dignity National Center that Val is involved with, and full disclosure, I'm a board member of Death with Dignity National Center, and I truly appreciate all of they do throughout the United States. But they had a grant that they gave to us in order to redo our website. So when we launch that, we'll let you know. We're hoping to be really cleaned up and easy for you to find information, resources, and take action when you're ready. And again, some of the things we have coming up, if you're not already signed up for our newsletter, shoot us an email at info@ohiooptions.org and we'll add your email address, because this way you can join us. We have had some phenomenal book club discussions already, and we are turning to the next one, Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, and then the movie club on Here a While, and then A Death Over Dinner that already has people signing up for it. So this has just been a great way to keep connected and explore some really important topics. Our financials are strong. We're a small group, but Muffy was going to review those a little bit with you.
Thank you. So as Lisa said, we're strong and small but mighty. And we were fortunate this year to raise over $50,000 for our cause. And this came from not only family donor funds and grants, but also from individuals who gave both small amounts and large amounts. And we thank every single person for their donations, because every dollar does count. And we're very, very conservative about how we spend our money. And we're trying to take good care to make it stretch as far as it can possibly go. And our goal in the next coming year is to increase not only the number of donors, but the average gift. You can see that we doubled our donations from fiscal year 19 to fiscal year 20. And once again, thank you to all of you who have supported us. This is just tremendous. Please continue to support us at whatever level you feel comfortable doing. And we can accept recurring donations and set those up for you so that you don't have to even think about it. We can also accept stock donations or legacy donations through wills and trusts. So if you're interested in any of those things, please reach out to us and we'll help you to make that happen. So thanks again for all your support.
So we're about done. I just wanted to make you aware that to keep looking for events. You know, when things are opening up, we're going to be out there holding events. We had a wonderful event scheduled with the City Club, which is the main speaking forum in Cleveland. We were a community partner. We were so proud bringing Brittany Menard's husband, Dan Diaz, coming, and that will have to be rescheduled. But we really look forward to when we can do that. This Life is Sweet event is just a benefit. Celebrate life, celebrate our efforts, and we will be holding that hopefully in October. So stay tuned to all of those, and bring your friends, you know, bring your family, bring your colleagues, let them know that this is going on. And again, we thank you for your support. It's how we do what we do.
While you're waiting for questions to come in, I just want to commend you and your organization. Watching your annual report was a trip down memory lane for me of what it was like here in Maine, you know, doing all of the things you can possibly do in terms of outreach, interfacing with other organizations, advocacy work, talking about end of life options, encouraging people to talk about the end of their lives. So what I would encourage you with is don't give up, don't lose hope, don't get tired. I know it gets exhausting, but in the end, you know, it didn't really hit me that our law passed until the first death occurred here in Maine. And I was fortunate to be able to know that patient. And that's, to me, that made it all worth it. All of the exhausting uphill work, all of the frustration, it was the fruit of all of that labor. So keep going. You guys are doing amazing work.
Thank you, Val.
Lisa,
really appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Can I ask a question?
Does anyone have?
Yeah, this is Linda Anello. Valerie was talking in her presentation about the importance of making sure people understood what the law was and what it was not. I would be interested in hearing a summary of what she felt was most important for them to understand about what it was and what it was not.
Sure, thanks for your question, Linda. One of the things that I commonly hear is people will say, you know, we're so much kinder to our pets than we are to our people. And while I understand the compassionate place that comes from, it's really necessary to help people understand the difference between a medical aid in dying law and euthanasia, which is what we do with our pets when they're suffering. There are so many misperceptions. I still meet people in Maine who think, I'll just put this on my advance directive and my agent can do this for me if something happens. Absolutely not true. So to give people the basic talking points of how a patient would qualify, you have to have a 6-month prognosis confirmed by 2 physicians, et cetera, whatever is going to be in the bill that you guys are supporting. So dispelling the myths and then dispelling the oppositional messaging so that people can make a fully informed choice. So there are individuals who would not choose a death with dignity option for themselves because it just is not in moral alignment with their values, but they wouldn't stand in the way of anybody else who would want access to a law. So that's one kind of opposition, and that's not problematic. The organized opposition, where you have religious organizations and some disability rights organizations that I really feel are funded by religious money, where they not only don't believe in the option for themselves, but they don't believe in the option for anybody. And there will be all kinds of messaging, like, you know, the slippery slope message that if we pass this, then all hell is going to break loose, or the sky is going to fall, and we're going to start offing granny for the inheritance. I heard this about the law, and they start talking about the slippery slope. You can just calmly interrupt and say, well, that's not exactly true. Here's how that really works, and direct them away from that. I mean, you're not going to change the viewpoint of someone who is vehemently opposed to this issue. So the best that you can do is make sure that people who are wanting to learn about it are not swayed by messaging that contains falsehoods. And that's why I coined the term fact-based education, and I always use it.
We will be happy to do another session like this where we just go over the terms of the laws and then some of that messaging so that you all get used to it. And again, kind of the more you just hear us all talk and some of the terms and phrases that we use, the more you just get comfortable with these concepts and having the discussion.
How well the law works and why the opposition hates that. Something to that effect?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so essentially the Oregon law is so brilliant to finally dawn on me how amazing it was. So basically it does 2 things. There's a whole set of safeguards in there that says it is not these things. And that is essentially the law. The reason opposition hates it is because it is known to be effective. It has not put any population at risk of coercion. And what I have seen over the past probably 3 to 4 years is within the legislature's structure of the Oregon statute, or that Oregon language that has been so effective for so long.
Yeah, and again, as more states pass these laws, it just shows more and more that there just simply have been no cases of abuse. And we can point to that again and again and again. Which is really helpful because a lot of those arguments are, well, the slippery slope type of arguments that just have proven to not be valid.
One of the lobbyists we hired here in Maine during this last session was actually involved in the Citizens Campaign of 2000. And she leaned over and whispered to me during a Senate hearing that she couldn't believe that opposition hadn't found a single new thing to say in 20 years. Because she was hearing exactly the same things she had heard during the 2000 campaign.
Val, maybe you could share too your experience as a hospice volunteer and what happened with that leading up to the law and then after the law passed.
Yeah, what I found here in Maine, it was difficult for organizations to come out in support of the law for all kinds of administrative reasons. But we had a number of individuals inside of, hospice and the medical community who were supportive. We had, during our signature gathering campaign, we had physicians and nurses out gathering signatures to help us. It was just the most amazing thing. And again, I was a hospice volunteer, and at the time because I was a controversial person in my state, I was actually asked to stop volunteering, which was difficult. That was really hard to go through. But that same hospice organization, under a change of administration, now has a supportive policy, and finds it difficult that any administrator ever believed they shouldn't be supported. So it's challenging. And I think don't get frustrated when an organization won't make a commitment or won't pledge to be an advocate, because they may be in a, and then before you know it, all of these relationships that you're establishing right now that seem to not be bearing fruit, when your law starts going through the legislature or it passes, these organizations are going to be in touch with you like crazy. Yes.
In Vermont, they had the support of the governor too. He actually campaigned in support of the issue when he was running.
Actually a major issue in his campaign. And not long after, I believe he was elected, or just before he left office, his father used the law.
Yeah. And he has a beautiful quotes talking about how, they didn't know his father would use it, but it was a beautiful end to a productive life or something like that. So he really did a nice job of talking about that for his father. So right. Val, once again, we so appreciate you getting here through all of these challenges and all of your support and sharing everything. So thank you. We hope that the rest of your day is a little more calm.
Thank you. And thank you so much again for inviting me. It was really wonderful to be here with you all, and keep up the good work. I fully expect to be able to travel to Ohio to celebrate with you all one day.
Yay, we sure hope so.
Congratulations on your hard work being successful, and thank you.
Take care, everybody.
I could listen to Val all day long, but I wanted to just quickly revisit a question from Jolene. Are there any resources to help draft final wishes in our advanced directives in Ohio before the bill is passed? And I'm going to hand this over to our resident expert, Mary Jo Prince-Paul, about that. So she can take it.
Thanks for asking that question, especially in light of everything that we're seeing today in the media about advanced care planning and advanced directives in the face of COVID especially. So what I want to say about this is that the link that Sarah put up here in the chat is a great way to start. It has the resources that will direct you to the American Hospital Association, where you can download the legal documents in the state of Ohio, which would be the Ohio Living Will, the Ohio Durable Power of Attorney for Healthcare. And both of those documents combined equate to the advanced directive for the state of Ohio. There are two things that I always tell people about that document itself. It is just that, and it's not a standalone document if it hasn't had a conversation. And getting to that document in earnest in terms of it being completed is really the challenging part, in that having those conversations with your loved ones and with your medical providers, crucial. So there's a lot of resources that are available that can help with those conversations, and you can always directly connect with me as well. I'm glad to have conversations with you about that and how to go about doing that. Specifically on the slide that Lisa